Okay, it's great to share this topic here today. My topic here today is boost maintainability. Okay, let's start with an exception. What would you do when you see an exception? You will look at the error type or the source line or anything. If it were me, I will first take a glance on the error type and to see the source code to see if I can fix it immediately. But for this case, you see the source line is patch plus next patch. What's wrong with it? It looks fine. And after you check the code, you find actually next patch is an integer and the patch actually is HTML. It tells one thing. Actually, most of the time, we read the line randomly. We don't read the line like computer. Computer read the line from the first line to the last line one by one, right? But most of the time, when we writing the program or debugging or writing new feature, actually, we suddenly switch to a line and read it. So if we add some suffix of it, something like add underscore number or underscore HTML, the error line will be patch HTML plus next patch number. You will know what's wrong immediately. Okay. It's a concept from an article. This article is making wrong code look wrong, which is from a book series Joe on Software. Here is the English version, online English version. If you're interested in it, you can read it. This talk will be more system than it. I will introduce more technique to improve the maintainability, like it. By the way, Joe don't like exception, but actually I think in the modern programming language, exception is good. So please use exception. Okay, let's define our maintainability. According to our findings so far, we read the line randomly, right? So we define our maintainability as to understand a random line, the lines you need to read back. Of course, the lines is better to approach zero. It's because time is just money. When you get bad maintainability by this definition, you will take more time on finding what the line means. So you all have a good test on the talk, since every programmer always checks the speed. So many talk is about how to tuning your code, make your code fast. But most of the programmer forget the one important thing. Actually, most of the time, programmer is spent on debugging and understand the code, what the code means. So you choose a good talk, which can tell you to save the actual time. Okay. By the way, I'm Mosky. I'm from Taiwan, not China, and I'm a Python charmer at PyCon. I've spoken at a lot of conferences, including TEDx, PyCon in Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, and now for KR, and have some open source packages like Climbing and Mosky Liu. If you want to just use one line to convert your functions into a multi-command line program, you can consider Climbing. If you like the raw SQL like me, but had to composing string, you can try Mosky Liu. Okay. I'm also teaching Python. And if you want to find more, you can go mosky.tw. There will be my own presentations before. And yeah, I'm working in PyCon and we are hiring, but I think Taiwan is a little bit fair from Korea, so I'm not sure if you will want to, if you will interested in it. But PyCon do provide the best design product in Asia. So if you're interested in the good design in Asia, including Taiwan, Japan, Thailand, you can visit our website to find something special. It's today's online. First, I will define our maintainability. And I will tell you how to make the line to read back as 0. And if you can make it 0, how to progressive it from 0? Okay. Let's start with make it 0. A dominant rule is be exact and consistent. It sounds easy, but every programmer will always forget something when they are actually coding. Like, everything is result, actually. So when programmers have no idea about a name, they will use result. But result actually, because everything is a result, so if you use result, it can mean anything. So it's a bad name. So I will recommend you, if your variable contain an HTTP response, please just use response, which is better. And if your variable is pointing to a parser JSON from the HTTP response body, just use parser dictionary. Note it's not JSON, it's parser dictionary. Since JSON actually is a language, right? It's JavaScript object notation. So actually, to Python is a string. It's not a Python object. When you press it, it is a Python object. Maybe dict, maybe list. And if you use ORM, sometimes you will meet a case like this. You have a user class and use user class to make user instance. So you use user to point to the user instance. But in the same time, you use buyer to point to the user ID, which make reader confused. If you just read the left side, you will confuse that user is a user instance, but why buyer is not a user instance? Because they all have the suffix ER. So in this case, I will suggest you to just let them be more consistent. Buyer let the ER suffix to point to the user instance. If you want to represent ID, just add the suffix _ID to let the reader can know what you mean immediately. And you are not native speaker like me, please get a dictionary. When you have no idea dictionary is your good friend, please just search and find a more exact and consistent name. And one thing is important, we are all in a programming team, right? Every team will has its own or business own terms. You can use them first, then use the general dictionary. Okay. So far, I introduced some intuitional technique. I will introduce more formal tips for you. I call it operations hint. To use some hint to let the reader know what operations it supports. Like, patch is an okay name because patch is pretty understandable. But if you be more exact to use the number and HTML to hint what operation it supports, it will be much better because the integer and the string they support very different operation sets. And in typical web application, we will field the user can query. We may use a load field and a request field. You can let it be better. Like you can, your predefined field, you can add a suffix, set suffix, and maybe press from the user request, you can use set to make the code look just work. You won't confuse between what is it listed or it is set. And you may meet the case like it because user class has a similar interface with dictionary. So you may use user to point user instance and use user to point dictionary. In this case, if you can kindly add a suffix, that will be more clear. It's a very, very famous library request. Who had used it? Could you raise your hand? Okay, thank you. Let me ask you a question. Response object, task, and JSON, which is a method, which is a simple value? Could you remember? Okay, actually, in request, the task is actually is a property, so you can use it like a simple value, and the JSON actually is a method. So I don't know, but I confuse every time. I need to check the API every time. But since I took it many times, so actually I remember it now. But it's really confused the reader. So if when you design an API, if you can let it be task, you can read like a simple value, and always use verb. Always let function start with verb. It will be much better. It's another example from Django. In Django, the request object has a method, it's secure. But some programmers like this style to use is secure to point to a Boolean. It will let the reader confused too, because when reader read is secure, they don't know it's a function or it's a Boolean. So you can use just adjective to point a Boolean, to use a preposition to point a Boolean, or a simple sentence, or to infinitive to point Boolean. It will all better than use the be verb to point a Boolean, to let you can distinct function and a simple value, simple Boolean. Let me give a simple summary so far. So the operation hint actually hint the operation you should use. And the number for numeric. Plural for sequence usually is a mutable sequence like list. And if you know intuitive way, you can use underscore type. And you also can use abstract type like sequence or generator. They actually is not an actual type, but it means the operation set is support. For callable, please always start with a verb. And maybe you want to use yes/no question to mean it will return a Boolean. Or you can use to and a type to mean it converts a thing to another thing, like to string, to user, to raw, like that. For Boolean is a little special because start with verb, name start with verb to point to a Boolean is very common, but I strongly suggest you don't do that. Because normal object tag normal noun and the callable tag the name start with verb and yes/no question. So you can use adjective or preposition, start with a preposition or simple sentence or infinitive to get better understand to your user, to your reader. It also can apply to your function. Something like you can use verb and a page number. So the reader will know it returns a page number, not a page HTML. Or if you use get page, then if without context, you won't know it returns an HTML or a number. So if you be exact, it's very helpful to your reader and to reduce the line need to read back. And you can use query user or parse to tree. There is some other technique you can use, like explicit unknown. We all know the Python is dynamic typing language, so actually a function, you can pass anything into it. But sometimes we do accept very dynamic variable. You can use this hint underscore x to avoid an ambiguous name, like maybe s or something. And if you use the suffix you won't forget to determine the operation is support. You can use X and following if to put it into a correct name. In this case, you can use has attribute or its instance later. And please avoid none. None is very hard to handle in other languages like Java or Objective-C. So when you are interactive with app, if you respond a none in JSON is null, the app side will need to more effort to handle it. It's a reason. Another reason in Python is you can consider the following line: user equal to query user UID and check if the user is valid. If the query user returns none, you will get an attribute error. So it will make your program more easier to generate the unknown exception, indirect exception. So if you accept an exception in this case, I will suggest you just rest. Just rest a better exception in your function. Or you can use a dummy object like a fully functional user, but just return false in every validated function, like a dummy user or empty string. Here is an example about the security issue. Another type of the example about the security issue is a template. And I use template format to format the name into it. Could anyone find the problem? You can raise your hand. Okay, okay. If the name is script, let me look again. If name is script, that will trigger SSS attack. It means user can put any script to your code and your website will execute it. It can be avoided by such hint. You can hint is an HTML. So everything put into HTML should be HTML, right? So you won't forget to escape it to HTML. But you have to have the security stance. But it will be more easier to detect the security issue in your code. Okay. This case is very common. Argument equal to parse argument. It's pretty okay. But if you use this type, you can clearly see the domain and the codomain. The domain is JSON. The codomain is just dictionary, which is very understandable in this case. And it also represents a JSON, which is just a string, and the dictionary, which is a Python object. It's more clear. It also is operations hints. It hints the content type. The operation supported by the content type. Like a key for dictionary key over dictionary, or URL to remind you have to do present encoding. And the JSON to mean it's a JSON. And HTML to avoid XSS attack. And the SQL to avoid SQL injection. It's very important. If you're composing SQL and put it in a SQL suffix, you will always remember everything put into the string has dangerous. So you have to escape it very carefully. Here's some simple operations hint on numeral, like number, index, seconds. Seconds is very important. If you use some Python API, you will find every Python API about time. They don't say what unit it uses. It may accept seconds or milliseconds. But if you put the seconds in your argument list, you will immediately know it accepts seconds. Percentage and month day, like that. Okay. So far, we introduced the operations hint. You can also put hint on the structure. Like if you if you find a code, it say users, but what users? Users may look like users ID mapped to email. It's pretty okay. But if you can improve the name like UID email map, your reader will be more clear on your code. It's just UID mapped to email, and the type is mapping very clear. So it's better. And you can take some advantage on this case. Like you can clearly know the UID email pairs. We know two tuple is a pair. Many two tuple is pairs. And the pairs can be put into the dictionary function or type. So if you give a better structure hint, you can quickly transform the structure into the structure you want. And then another advantage is when you use SQL, you can use the code like it, like select UID email and put it into UID email pairs. And you will immediately know it can be loop. It can be Python's for loop and unpack to UID and email. And it's very clear because the code is just said it works. You don't have to guess what is in the result. Typically, we may write for UID email in maybe result, and you don't know what is result, so you have to check. But if you name it in list form, you can immediately know list lines work. Let me summary about a structure hint. I usually use key value and map to hint the dictionary structure. And tuple, for tuple, a pair is just a two tuple. Pair is many two tuple. And if the tuple is n tuple, I will put what's inside in the first, second, and the third place, and add the suffix tuple to hint the structure. We have some minor hints, like private hint. Actually, everybody knows the private hint, just add an underscore. But if you're in a team, you can define it more clear. Like I will define it as don't use it when out of a module or a class when I have a private hint. And I don't guarantee, and you can use, but I don't guarantee the behavior. It makes the code easier to check and refactor. Like when I read a class, I know the private things, I don't need to care. And when refactor, I know I don't need to check the variable in whole code base. I just need to check the variable in this module. You can also put some thinking on the verb or function. You can hint the performance by the verb. Like I usually use get to hint the function perform a memory operation, and purse calculate to hint is CPU bound operation, and the query for IO bound operation. You even can hint it has an underlying cache in your function. Then like I will use query or get, which is look just like it may have a cache. Our second session is progressive from 0. Because the tip I just shared has some limit because in some cases. So sometimes you can just make the line you need to read back to 0, but you can make it nearly 0. So unlike if too long, please use proper abbreviation. You can use, this website is very useful, named abbreviation.com, I think. You can use it to search the typical abbreviation people use to avoid yourself abbreviation. Because if you use your own abbreviation, you have to explain to everyone. So if you have a common abbreviation, please use the common abbreviation. And if you really can't do that, you can define it in common. Use a simple acronym, like receiver address dictionary. You can use acronym like RAD. It's very simple, but in some cases, something like the inside util function, you may handle this variable very often. So if you use the full name, it will be very hard to maintain in a function. So if it's just inside a function or in very small scope, I will use this style to rename the function, to rename the variable. But I will always define what's a coordinate mean. Like this, I will add a comment and say RID is actually receiver address dictionary. And we can learn from the micro markup language. Like the language will define something like paragraph and a section. You can use the blank line to separate paragraph. And if the abortive won't work in your code, it at least can limit the cognitive checks for your reader. Unlike if I want to know the get cache, I just read this paragraph. And if this paragraph still can let me understand how it works, I can check the session. I will separate session by title comment. You can use the title like Markdown to separate your paragraph. In summary, it's just like IST, IEST, or Markdown. And a paragraph contains no blank line, and the blank line separate paragraph. And also define a section. The section is just contain paragraph, and they use a title command to separate the sections. And it also works like a semi-function. We all know many coding style will suggest you to split the function. Small function is better than big function. But in the real case, actually we will have long function, and it will be hard to maintain if when you split it to small function. So in such case, we actually can arrange the code by use the section technique to separate your section, like make your long function as many semi-function to make the code more readable. Next is very important and useful technique. It's line of functions up. Did you ever observe the hidden lines in your code? Okay, let me show you a simple picture. We got a line number from 1 to n, and we have a function in the middle. It's a util function. So function A, call it, and function B, call it. Did you find a hidden line? Actually, it's not hidden, it's shown on the slide. The function A, the cost line is down. The direction is down. And the function B, the calling direction is up. So you find the calling direction is a little different from other. So my advice is you can keep your direction in the same direction. Then you can identify the function's layering, and maybe you can just modulate later. Okay, this technique can help you to measure the disorderliness in your code, and it can help you to layer functions and maybe let them be a module later. And the most important thing is keep them has same direction. If in a project, you can do the same in the modules. The line between modules, and you can category the modules into packages by this skill. The final thing, but maybe it's the most important thing in this talk, is how to fetch the best smell. In my talk, I introduced many best smell, right, so far, and many books will tell you what is the best smell, why you should avoid it, how to avoid it. But don't lose, because programmer's time is limited. You can just spend all of your time to improve the old code. It's impossible. You should spend your time on designing some rocking feature, not refactor the old code. So I will suggest you, if you have limited time, you can just use comment. Like comment a pitfall, like the function actually, in some case, it will return none. You can just put a comment and hint the actual return type, or any side effect. Like some function may actually query a lot of database, but the name is get. Yeah, maybe you made a function name get something, but it actually perform a full table scan SQL. You can just hint it, rather than really rewrite it, or pull a to-do. We always want to make the code better, but we don't have time. So you can put a to-do in your code to let your manager, or maybe just yourself, to know I'm not don't do it. I'm just not have time to do it. Yeah. And seal it with the better name or a stable wrapper, like maybe a good name to contain a poor functions return the value from the poor function return, or define a good function name to wrap the all poor functions name. And the final step focus on everyone's feature. Okay. On the feature, another refactoring. Although refactoring is important, but we should put more time on the real new feature, and which is really help user. It's not make programmer happy. Okay. So final, use hint to boost the maintainability. That's my talk. Thanks.
발표자님의 발표가 끝났습니다. 발표자님께 Q&A를 하실 분은 앞으로 나와서 Q&A를 하시면 됩니다. 단 영어로 하셔야 합니다.
Sorry, I can hear.
Thanks for your presentation here. It was really great. You know, all the ideas you suggested was great, but in reality, relying on programmers to follow those rules may not work out so well, because hundreds of people. For example, someone could name a variable like email, name, pairs, but he or she could put an integer value, right? So, do you have any ideas or tools to verify this common mistakes in advance, like in real time or like test time?
It's a good question. I'm waiting for it. Okay, yeah, it's a very difficult thing to let everyone to follow the guideline. But in my experience in my own company, I find to force everyone to follow the guideline is worst decision, because if you every day in company you have to follow some guideline to write a code, you will feel very depressed because I just writing code, your guideline limit my imagination or something. So I will advise the guideline should be suggestion, should not be rules. And if you are a code reviewer, you can advise the reviewee's code. You can say, if you name it, you can gain some advantage. Like you can let other reader to reduce the line he or she need to read back. It's a very important thing. You can just make an example and tell your partner it's better because you can reduce the line we need to read back. And in my company, I write a guideline accordingly slide, and I will share this slide in my company, and I will suggest in code review to make everybody's coding style is more like this, but it's not one nice thing. It's not order or command to let everybody follow. Hope it will help you.
또 질문하실 분 있나요?
Thanks for your presentation. I was just wondering about whether your thoughts about Python type annotations introduced in Python 10.5. Does it change anything with percentages or does it improve or its ability?
Could you more near the...
Python 3.5 introduced type annotations. Does it change your presentation contents?
Sorry, I don't get it. You mean my slide? What's in my slide?
No, there's a new feature in Python.
You mean type hint?
Yeah, type hint.
Yeah. Type hint has limit effect because unlike structure hint, type hint can work on structure hint. Yes, you can use type hint to reduce some problem, but the type hint has its limit. Like, actually it's not forks, so you have to run a linter to check your error. And the process will be, you have to run a linter. But if you use the technique I shared today, you will let the writer, when they read, when they write, they will know the error immediately. So I think typing and the technique I shared today has different angle of view to solve this problem. So.
네, 그럼 이상으로 발표자의 발표를 마치겠습니다. 103에서 라이팅 토크에 대해 열릴 예정입니다. 관심 있으신 분들은 가시기 바랍니다. 네, 감사합니다.